has never been a ghost story created especially for the adult moviegoer until The Innocents. 20th Century Fox, which presented Deborah Kerr in Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, and such outstanding motion picture immortals as Snake Pit, Gentleman's Agreement, and Peyton Place, now gives you The Innocents.
Jack Clayton's 1961 The Innocents is a film shrouded in enigma, a tale where the boundaries between reality and perception are exposed. Described as a sensory terror experience, it is also a thought-provoking movie that raises so many questions and concerns. At the heart of this enigma lies the recurring motif of windows, playing a pivotal role in conveying ambiguity. The film's evocative use of windows serves as a powerful metaphor, almost like a mirror reflecting back our own consciousness. In today's video, we're going to explore this amazing masterpiece, highlighting some of the different questions that the film arises while discussing relevant aspects of The Innocents. Just as a warning, this video might contain mild spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, you might want to pause the video here. Or not.
Yes.
Before we begin, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to quickly revisit the plot of The Innocents, which revolves around a governess called Miss Giddens, brilliantly played by Deborah Kerr, who is hired by a rich man to take care of two orphaned children who happen to be his nephew Miles, played by Martin Stephens, and his niece Laura, played by Pamela Franklin, at a country estate called Bly in England. This gentleman has but one important request, and that is for her to take full responsibility and never bother him with any further issues concerning the children.
She must never trouble me. Never, never. Neither complain, nor appeal, nor write. Simply take the whole thing over and leave me alone.
Unexperienced and having lived a sheltered life thus far, the governess settles easily into her new role upon arriving at the Bly Manor. However, she becomes increasingly convinced that the house is haunted by the spirits of two former employees, Peter Quint and Miss Jessel, whom she learns about by the housekeeper, Miss Gross, played by Max Jenkins. These apparitions, according to her, seem to have a corrupting influence on the children, and so the governess becomes determined to protect them from the perceived evil forces at play.
I tell you, believe me, the children are in dreadful peril. What are we to do?
Paraphrasing Winston Churchill, The Innocents is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. In its very initial sequence, even before the opening credits roll or the 20th Century Fox logo appears, we are presented with a black screen and the eerie sound of Flora singing a mournful ballad. This lasts for over a minute. Then we hear the sound of birds chirping, while the figure of an anguished Miss Giddens appears with her trembling hands together, seemingly in prayer and speaking about the children with words filled with significance. What is she really doing? When is this taking place? These frames will not start to make sense until the movie's climax. As scholar Christopher Frayling explains, initially the script for the film started in flashback, which was later discarded in favor of this greater, more enigmatic effect. Still, we are left questioning, has this been indeed a flashback? It's all for us to decide. The uncle moves to the window, and as he looks through it, turning his back to the governess, he mentions his niece and nephew with noted indifference. This is also the first sequence of the movie featuring windows, as hinted before, one of the many but relevant symbolic elements of the film. In classic Gothic literature, the architectural space where the action takes place plays an important role not only as a setting but as a symbol, almost like another character. In many cases, it stands as an allegory of of our own minds. It meant a physical representation of the increasing preoccupation and interest for the psychological and paranormal, a tangible space that served as a manifestation of the turmoil that goes through our psyche and the dark spaces of human society that are kept hidden. Actually, the house that we see in The Innocents is called Sheffield Park, which, along with its grounds and gardens, served as the Bly Manor estate in Jack Clayton's adaptation of Henry James' The Turn of the Screw. The house interiors were shot at Shepperton Studios, where the oppressive Gothic interiors, along with any other architectural element, could be devised for major cinematic effect.
Beautiful. Well, we do our best.
In this quest to expose all that is hidden and forbidden, windows are a powerful evocative visual motif in literature and in cinema, being both, to an extent, in essence, large windows to the outside world. In Gothic literature, and by influence also in a film like The Innocents, windows stand as thresholds between the inner and the external world, between good and evil, between what's exposed and what remains unseen. Windows are boundaries and at the same time symbols of transgression. The scenes we see in the film in which the governess sees the image of the deceased, Peter Quint, startling her through frosted windows, are very reminiscent of other symbolic uses of windows in other classic Gothic tales such as Wuthering Heights, Bram Stoker's Dracula, or even Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. At the same time, frosted windows in the 1961 film represented a powerful mechanism to convey visually the apparitions described so vividly by Henry James in his novella. This was one of the many fantastic devices that its cinematographer Freddie Francis resorted to create the wonderful, amazing visuals of The Innocents. Billowing curtains on open windows, elaborate dissolves and superimpositions, these were just some of the techniques employed by Francis, forced by the 20th Century Fox to film it in CinemaScope, much to the regret of its director Jack Clayton. Francis managed again to use a series of lighting tricks as well as hand painting the edges of the lenses, resulting in the film's remarkable visual identity charged with claustrophobia and paranoia. But perhaps the film's most prevalent enigma, one inherited from The Turn of the Screw, is its interpretation. Since the novella was first published in 1989, originally in a serial format, it was initially perceived as a traditional ghost story, or as Henry James himself would describe, an amusette to catch those not easily caught. In 1925, literary critic Edna Kenton was one of the first to point out in her essay Henry James to the Ruminant Reader that the focus of the story should be placed not onto the haunting tale, but on the governess. 10 years later, Edmund Wilson published The Ambiguity of Henry James, an essay that became almost as influential and as discussed as the novella itself. Jack Clayton had read this essay, in which Wilson directly defends the idea that the governess is projecting her neurosis and sexual repression onto the children, and the apparitions are figments of her imagination, her own hallucinations. The story was then interpreted through the lens of Freudian theories, which was an approach later debated and questioned. Also, Professor Harold Clark Goddard, in an essay discovered posthumously, had also found enough basis to also defend the idea of the hallucination theory, presenting a case for a story whose protagonist is an unreliable witness and therefore the credibility of her account of the events a literary trap.
Sometimes one can't help imagining things.
Clayton, as I said, was very influenced by Wilson's essay, but opted for giving the audience full credit for what they were in fact seeing, and thus he maintained the ambiguity by never revealing some of the aspects of the story also unresolved in the novella. This adaptation was the responsibility of American author Truman Capote, immersed in the writing of the famous In Cold Blood, who took some time to accept this job as he had worked previously with Clayton for John Huston's 1953 film Beat the Devil. James' novella had also been previously adapted by William Archibald in the form of a play which in fact accepted the apparitions or ghosts as true and real. John Mortimer also worked on the script to Victorianize the language of the screenplay, the final result being 90% the work of Truman Capote, as Jack Clayton himself confirmed, was nothing short of a sublime exercise in screenwriting.
The Innocents, produced and directed by Jack Clayton, the man who directed Room at the Top, turned into fearful reality by the magnificent performance of Miss Deborah Kerr.
In the end, The Innocents makes us doubt of everything we see, but perhaps the most terrifying question that the film arises is, what is the real torment or terror to the children? Adults are the ones to be afraid of here. The Innocents remains rightfully as one of the best horror ghost stories told in a cinematic and stylistic way. Truly a multi-sensory unforgettable experience that I highly recommend to anyone, even for someone like me who is not by any means a horror fan. Its influence and legacy has expanded many generations and stands with films such as The Haunting, released in 1963, as one of the scariest, most ambiguous horror films that perhaps feel even more disturbing now than at the time they were released. So on that note, I end the video here. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you have a wonderful Halloween if you celebrate, and until my next video, may you continue watching and wondering, for the world of cinema is also filled with enigma and ambiguity.